Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk all things Ant-Man and his new uniform to coincide with the MCU Ant-Man and the Wasp movie update, and why I think his uniform might be better than you think. But first, today's video is sponsored by Amino. Amino is like a massive hub of communities spanning every major topic of interest, all from your phone. And it's definitely a great place to find people who are as big of a fan as you are of that thing, and I can attest to that especially. And just to show you that I wasn't kidding when I used the word massive, they've got aminos from topics ranging from the Incredibles to incredible cosplays and what these people make for costumes to wear at conventions and stuff like that. As far as my favorite amino, the one that I love the most, definitely the Marvel. I hit that up to find behind the scenes photos and information about upcoming movies like Captain Marvel, or talk about, you know, recent TV shows that I've devoured in a couple of days like Luke Cage. One in particular I wanted to share with you guys is this Disney Marvel crossover, Alice in Wonderland and Doctor Strange. I really loved seeing this artwork. Additional some things you can do on the Marvel Amino. You can see what other people are up to, like we got 217 people right now chatting online, and then you can also do both group chat with text, and you can do voice chat and video chat if you know people personally on there, or you want to make some deeper connections. Finally, I wanted to encourage you guys. I threw up a poll on the Marvel Amino. We've got a lot of people voting on it already. Let me know your thoughts about the Ant-Man and Wasp tie-in to the next Infinity War movie. So big thanks to the guys over at Amino, and now let's take an in-depth look at this small hero, Ant-Man. Now, when discussing his uniform and when discussing the upgrade, I am going to completely ignore the other uniforms and the base model, because frankly, none of these are even close to what his newest uniform can do. This is kind of like Winter Soldier in the sense that without the uniform he's nothing. Now with the uniform he's not up to Winter Soldier's level, but it's that kind of transformation for that character. So unlike perhaps yesterday's video with Ghost, where I said the character is good and potentially usable with both with and without a uniform, that is not the case for Ant-Man. So what has happened to him to make him quite a bit better? Well, it's both offensive and defensive. He basically got a total rework. All of his skills got some sort of change. Even his fourth skill, while the animation is the same, it's got a lot more hits, so that actually deals a lot more damage. Top to bottom, however, everything is new. So his first skill, well, there's no iframe, it's decent damage, and it has a 20% chance to miss, which does synergize with the iframes and the dodge that he has. His second skill, one of his best, is a long iframe, and it's got good damage, and it's very nice to combo with a short cooldown of 3.5 seconds. Third skill has a debuff effect for the enemy to make them weaker. This one has a short iframe at the beginning, and it's got some guard break ability, which means it'll guard break the enemy and force them to stutter if they don't have guard break immunity or super armor. And then Flying Rush, we know it's the figure 8 with the Ant-Man on the ant flying around, except there's a lot more ants this time, so it does a lot more damage. This is the damage that you want to proc with your damage proc. So if you're using Ant-Man for ABX, or if you're using him for high level World Boss Ultimate and you have a damage proc obelisk or a CTP of destruction or energy, you want to time it so that you use this skill when your proc activates, those 5 seconds of boosted damage. Then his fifth skill, he throws up 3 small things. He throws up 3 PIM discs, and those 3 things get bigger. We have a car that actually rotates, and each rotation does damage, which is a really cool kind of detail. There's a tank, which does damage when it lands and then damage again when it explodes, just like his previous uniforms. And then we have a giant ant, and the giant ant has a fear effect in addition to being a summon for a few seconds. But the ant is actually bad, and I'll explain why. With having 4 skills that deal iframes, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's actually very hard to hit Ant-Man as the enemy. But when Ant-Man uses his 5th skill and he summons the ant, the clone thing, that is a target for the enemy. And so what can happen, and what has happened, and I wasn't really able to capture this well enough on timeline battles in PvP, but you basically use the 5th skill, the ant comes out, and then when you're in another iframe, let's say 4 or 3, the enemy can actually iframe and attack the ant, because they still have a target even though you're iframing in another skill. So then they iframe, and then you get knocked out of your iframe, and then Ant-Man just drops what he's doing and stands there, and then when the enemy re-engages you and attacks you, he deals damage. So unfortunately, as fun as this skill is, it's quite terrible for PvP, which is really unfortunate, and I kind of wish, you know, that they hadn't given him a summon at all. If it was just an ant that exploded, I know that's kind of graphic, but if it was just an ant that did one hit and disappeared and wasn't a target, this skill would be fantastic, but right now it's actually a liability. Despite the good damage and despite the AoE, it's actually a dangerous skill to use in PvP. Overall, I think that this character is actually worse for PvP than ever, and that's kind of a bold statement to say, a bit of a controversial statement, because he's always been about PvP. He's got low damage, but he's got very high survivability. You know, 20 seconds of 87% guaranteed dodge. If the enemy doesn't have ignore dodge, this is basically 20 seconds of pure invincibility. You can't penetrate it, nothing is going to work, which is actually quite powerful, and combined with a long iframe on 4 and combined with iframes, you can basically just never able to get hit, and you can be immune forever. But with iframe ignore, with a lot of characters now having ignore dodge either as part of their base stats and their base passive effects, also part of leaderships, also part of lots of obelisks including CTPs, AntMan gets hit a lot now, and it's pretty disappointing, but that's kind of the way it is. And so the 5th skill really doesn't help you in that sense, because, for example, against Winter Soldier, you use the 5th skill, he uses the 4th skill to snipe the ant, and he'll snipe you with his 4th skill, and you'll both die. You kind of ant and AntMan. But this uniform, because it boosts his damage so much, his damage basically is boosted on every single skill, does make him a lot better for PvE. Now, another thing that you might not have thought of that I actually did is a tier 1 AntMan. And this actually was an idea that I got from someone who asked me during my live stream tonight, just a few hours ago, hey, I have AntMan tier 1, should I tier 2 him with the new uniform? And that got me thinking. Sorry I didn't answer your question, anonymous viewer, but that got me thinking. Should people buy AntMan's uniform if he's not tier 2? And that's actually a pretty decent thing to do, because he becomes a much better hero at tier, or with this uniform, rather than just going from tier 1 to tier 2. Tier 1 to tier 2 does give him this nice effect and does boost his base stats, of course, but if you think about it, he can now safely iframe 1, 2, 3, or 2, 3, 4, 5 without taking basically any damage in manually played game mode. So if you're doing anything like story mode, daily missions, if you're doing world boss, if you're doing ABX, you know, all those kind of Shadowland, you'll never get hit because you'll just have 4 iframes that you can play with constantly. And because the iframes on 2 and 4 are so long, you can actually just switch between those 2 skills. So he's actually a pretty decent tier 1 character, which is kind of bizarre to say. Now, I'm not recommending that all you guys out there with tier 1 AntMans go and purchase his uniform, but if you don't already know, the Legendary Battle is giving away a free 6-star AntMan just by opening up the Legendary Battle page if you don't have the character unlocked already. So, yeah, it might be a nice fast track to a pretty decent speed hero now that he has his uniform, because he's basically useless, as we've already covered, without his uniform. Now, let's get into a bit more detail about these skills and how I can see them being combined for PvE or PvP. For PvE, I think your best bet, especially if you have a damage proc, is to do 5 cancel into 4, but you have to be very careful with the 5th skill cancel. It's almost right at the end. The shrinking and growing effect is very precise, I guess, with throwing the PIM discs. And so if you cancel it too early, you get none of the effects. But in PvE, this skill is safe. It's fine to use because almost no enemies have have iframes, so they won't be able to ignore targeting, which will knock you out of your iframes. Additionally, because very few enemies, if any, have ignore dodge, AntMan won't get punished in any PvE content aside from a few very specific instances. But cancel 5 into 4, let 4 run the full course of your damage proc, and then you can do 3 into 2. You can cancel 3 after he does the growing and the backflip, and then go into 2. However, PvP is a totally different scenario, and here's where we get into a bit of the very minute details of Marvel Future Fight. Despite the fact that 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all iframes, they're not all made the same way. Unfortunately, some iframes happen faster than others. We already know from Wasp's or from Ghost's video and others that some iframes don't need a target, like Ghost's 5th skill or Ghost's 4th skill. Actually, that's not an iframe. Or Jean Grey's 3rd skill. But in AntMan's case, he's got 2 fast iframes and 2 slow iframes. Slow iframes are basically bad because you can't use them to counter other characters' iframes. So for example, you see Thanos going into his portal to do his 5th skill. skill, that's going to be an iframe in about half a second. If you have a fast iframe skill, like Ant-Man's second skill or Ant-Man's fourth skill, you can cast that immediately if you've got good reflexes and good attack speed, and you can go into your iframe first, thereby forcing Thanos to come back out of his portal. And we've seen this done before in both PvE against Infinity Thanos, the fight, the world boss fight, and in PvP. And then, unfortunately, Ant-Man has 2 slow iframes. 3 and 5 are both very slow. You basically can't. I wasn't able to cancel very many characters' iframes by using 5 and 3, but I was successfully able to kind of chain iframe and also to cancel iframes of my enemies using 4 and 2. So my PvE rotation, while it's 5 cancel 4 3 2, my PvP rotation is very simple: 2 and then 4, and then 2 and then 4. You can't cancel out of 4, so don't try, but just keep mashing the button for 2, and as soon as Ant-Man comes out of the 4th skill, you'll be able to do the 2nd skill. You can, however, cancel out of the 2nd skill, so be careful. If you don't want to cancel that too early because of cooldown, you might find yourself in trouble. But he definitely does need max skill cooldown for this, so you can consider for a build something like Hawk's Eye. Hawk's Eye is actually not so bad because it gives him dodge in addition to the other stats. Cooldown duration is not as necessary, but the dodge is nice and the rest of the attack stats are nice. I do think for a build for Ant-Man, and I know my potential is kind of painful, that max dodge is, or very close to max dodge, is probably your best bet. I do want my Ant-Man to be offensive, personally speaking, but I think you should make him offensive if you want to use him for PvE, but I think max dodge is going to make him as useful as possible for PvP. I think without max dodge, without an invincibility proc, he's useless. And unfortunately, giving him an invincibility proc makes him sort of useless for PvE. So I would say get the most out of him, build him for PvE, build him with a damage proc, and then if you want to try to make him good for PvP, give him as much dodge as possible, as close to 75, so he can kind of be like Spider-Man in that sense, running around with 75% dodge all the time, in addition to that kind of guaranteed dodge sometimes. As far as the obelisk, because I am going with a full offensive build, I actually got a CTP of energy to roll pretty well and pretty good stats, and I slapped one on him. It makes him quite good, and he can one-shot certain characters, especially with the number of hits on his 4th skill. When you time that with the damage proc, it's pretty good. You know, most characters who are strong in tier 2 can one-shot someone with a CTP of energy, so I'm not, you know, trying to extend or exaggerate his damage or his power, but you can see from the timeline clips, I was able to kill this Thanos at level 62, I believe he was, able to kill this Adam Warlock, I was able to kill, after much difficulty, a Captain America as well, so it's definitely possible. But in order to reach a maximum dodge build, especially for PvP as I did, the 71%, I had to combine the team up bonus from Wasp, which is 4.8%, with Valkyrie's leadership, which is another 11%, in addition to his mythic uniform, which I rolled double dodge on the 1st and 4th sets. What's good about this uniform as well is you get Captain America Infinity War as one of the options, and you get Winter Soldier. So 2 of the most sought after and probably recently purchased uniforms are going to be part of Ant-Man's rotation. The other 3 are not very common, especially this blue and yellow boy, but you know, 2 out of 5, especially on 2 of the more decent stats. They're not 2 and 5, but 1 and 3 are pretty good. Makes the uniform a little bit better of an investment. The last tip I have for you guys, if you're still struggling with Ant-Man, definitely try to cast his 2nd skill and his 4th skill a bit further away from the enemy. I find that if Ant-Man is able to shrink down and jump on the wasp, on the ant with flying wings, that flies, from far away, it's easier for you to force the enemy not to iframe. And sometimes I tried to cast the 4th skill when Ant-Man was very close to his opponent, and they would iframe at the same time, kind of in conjunction, or you know, at the same time, and then I would be kicked out of my 4th skill. So it's not a perfect rotation, it's not a perfect attack strategy, but just a few tips here and there can make you and give you the most, so you can get the most out of Ant-Man, this tiny hero that I'm honestly in love with, but you know, he's definitely not the best. He's no Wolverine. But let me know what you guys think of the new Ant-Man with the uniform. Let me know how high you've gotten and what's your greatest feat with Ant-Man, if any. I am gunning for the #1 Ant-Man as well, so I'll keep you guys updated on that. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content and you want to support me. Hit the bell if you don't want to miss any of my uploads. And of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.